She had never lost, and a name that the Bangkok crowd said the way people say a warning. They called her Dao. The word means star, and she had worn a single white orchid pinned above her ear before every one of those 52 fights. By the end of most nights, the orchid was still there. Her opponents usually weren't standing to notice. Lumpini Stadium in September of 1971 was loud the way it was always loud on a Saturday. Tin roof holding in heat and noise, wooden benches packed 3,000 deep, the smell of cigarette smoke and street food drifting in from outside. Dao was 24 years old, and she had just finished her second fight of the night in under 4 minutes, and the crowd was still making the low, rolling sound that followed her fights, not cheering exactly, but something closer to collective relief that it was over. 80 kilometers north, a film crew was in its 10th week of shooting a low-budget martial arts picture in a half-converted factory. The lead actor was a wiry young man from Hong Kong that almost nobody outside Asia had heard of yet. He had 2 days off, and a friend training at a Bangkok gym had written to him for months about a fighter at Lumpini he needed to see with his own eyes. The young man took the bus down, bought a regular ticket, and sat in the 3rd row. His name was Bruce Lee. He watched Dao's second fight end the way her fights usually ended, a setup of 3 strikes, the last one an elbow that arrived almost invisibly, low and from the side. Her opponent went down and didn't get up for nearly 20 seconds. The crowd made its low sound. Dao walked back to her corner without looking at the man on the canvas. In the 3rd row, Bruce Lee smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone enjoying violence. It was the specific smile of someone who has spent months trying to understand a principle on paper and has just watched it executed perfectly in front of him. He had been corresponding with a trainer in Bangkok for weeks, asking about hip rotation, about the elbow, about a mechanic that didn't exist in the style he'd grown up with. He had drawn the angle on paper a dozen times. He had never seen it move until tonight. Dao's cut man saw the smile first. He had worked her corner since she was a teenager, and he knew every version of attention a crowd gave her. Fear, awe, disbelief. He had never seen someone smile at the moment a man went down with blood coming from his ear. He leaned over the ropes and pointed. Dao turned. The orchid was still in her hair, slightly tilted. She found the foreigner in the 3rd row, still smiling, not looking away. He inclined his head slightly, not mockery, something closer to acknowledgement. To Dao, after 14 years of men underestimating a small woman in the ring, it read as exactly one thing. She didn't wait for the microphone. She walked to the ropes, pointed, and said in accented but clear English, "You, the one smiling." The crowd didn't understand what was happening. Half hadn't seen the smile, half didn't speak English, but 3,000 people leaned forward at once. Bruce stood. He answered without raising his voice, and Lumpini's acoustics carried it. "I wasn't laughing," he said. "I was admiring." It was the wrong answer, not because it was false, but because Dao didn't believe it. She'd heard men explain away their laughter at her before. She put both hands on the top rope and leaned forward.
"Then come up here," she said. "Say it again from here." The building made a sound like a wave rolling forward, surprise, excitement. 3,000 people asking each other who the stranger in the 3rd row was. For 3 seconds, Bruce didn't move. He hadn't come to fight. He'd come to watch, to learn. But a 52-0 champion was waiting at the ropes in front of 3,000 people, and something in him, the part that had made him a martial artist in the first place, was already moving before he'd decided anything. He folded his shirt, set it on the empty seat beside him, and walked toward the ring the way a man walks toward a workbench. No hurry, no hesitation. He climbed the steps, ducked the ropes, and stood in the center, a head shorter than most of her previous opponents and considerably lighter. Dao looked him over with the flat, assessing eyes of someone who had read 52 bodies before stepping into a ring with them. This one was different, and she knew it before either of them moved. The referee, confused, asked what was happening. Dow answered in 2 short sentences of Thai. He looked at Bruce, hesitated, and stepped back. No rounds, no scoring, a demonstration, the kind that sometimes happened at Lumpini in the last hour when a champion wanted to make a point. "What's your name?" Dow asked. "I'm a martial artist. That's what matters." "We'll see," she said. The bell rang. She came immediately, no feeling-out jab, just a forward step into a teep thrown with real power, the ball of her foot catching him low in the stomach before he'd fully adjusted. The air went out of him for half a second, and before his foot had even returned to the canvas, her elbow was already arcing toward his jaw, faster than anything he'd read about, faster than the books described, the strike arriving almost simultaneously with the kick instead of after it. He turned his head 2 inches. The elbow passed in front of his face, close enough that he felt the air move. He hadn't blocked it. He'd moved out of its path by the width of a thumb. A reflex built from 8 weeks of studying that exact angle on paper, on buses, in his sleep. He stepped back and looked at her. In her corner, the cut man leaned forward, recognizing something he couldn't yet name. Dow didn't give him time to think. A low kick landed on his thigh. He let it land, absorbing the sting, because he was watching her shoulders now, the small quarter-second dip before the elbow came. By the 10th second of the fight, he wasn't reacting to her strikes anymore. He was reading the strikes before they existed.
The second teep he caught with his open hand and redirected sideways. No one had ever caught her teep before. It cost her balance for a fraction of a second. She corrected by stepping wide, and the wide step opened her hip line completely. He saw the opening. He could have driven a punch straight into her exposed side and ended it. He stepped back instead. The crowd, which had expected the stranger flattened in 12 seconds, began making a different sound, confused, uncertain, the sound of 3,000 people simultaneously revising what they thought they were watching. For the next 90 seconds, Bruce Lee threw nothing. He moved like water finding the shape around a stone, never where her strikes landed, never quite gone, just elsewhere. The combination that had ended 48 careers, jab, teep, elbow, found only air 3 times, 4 times. A hook meant for his ribs landed on the bone of his hip instead. A knee in the clinch found empty space as he pivoted 90 degrees. He wasn't blocking, he was redirecting, the principle he'd spent years building into something he'd started calling Jeet Kune Do. A fighter who strikes with full commitment has a path through space, and the most efficient answer isn't to stop that path, but to no longer be in it by the smallest possible margin. A fighter who blocks absorbs the cost of every strike. A fighter who isn't there absorbs nothing. Dow was paying for everything that didn't land. Each missed elbow cost stamina. Each redirected knee cost balance. By 90 seconds, her breathing had deepened and her shoulders had dropped, a feeling she recognized instantly because she'd put it in 48 other people and never felt it herself. She stopped. 3 feet away, she looked at him. He wasn't breathing hard. His hands were still at his sides. He hadn't thrown a single strike. "Why?" she said in English. He didn't answer. He looked back at her with the same calm expression he'd worn for 90 seconds, and the question sat there, unanswered, in front of 3,000 silent people. She came again, everything she had left, 14 years of training thrown without the patience that had built her record, strikes arriving without the spaces between them now. None of it landed clean. On what would be the last exchange, she stepped wide, and he stepped inside, and his fist came to rest against her sternum with no wind-up at all. There was no distance to travel, because there had never been a need for distance. His hip turned a fraction of an inch, his shoulder followed, and 140 pounds of trained mass arrived through a fist that had never moved back. She left her feet, 2 steps backward, then the canvas. She had been hit harder than in 52 professional fights by a man who still wasn't breathing hard. He stepped forward. His knee rose, the descending strike that ends a fighter on the ground, already committed, already falling. 3 inches from her collarbone, he stopped it, held it there, suspended for half a second. Then he set it down. It was over. No bell. The referee didn't move. He didn't need to. Dow looked up at him from the canvas. She'd been a fighter for 14 years. She didn't need it explained. The strike she never saw begin, the leg that didn't finish, the half-second pause. She read all of it from the floor and didn't protest. The orchid had fallen from her hair sometime during the exchange and lay on the canvas between them. Bruce bent down, picked it up, and held it out on his open palm. She took it without a word. He gave the smallest nod, and Dow, 24 years old, 52-0, who had never once in her career acknowledged an opponent with anything beyond a handshake, pressed her palms together at her chest and bowed, slowly, forehead nearly to her knees. She held it for almost 5 seconds. Bruce returned it, the bow of someone receiving something he hadn't expected and wasn't sure he'd earned.
Then he turned, ducked under the ropes, retrieved his folded shirt from the front row, and walked toward the exit. "What's your name?" Dow called after him. The doors were already swinging shut. If he answered, the building swallowed it. He took the morning bus back to the film set and worked 18 more days. The film was the big boss. It made him a star within 2 years. Dow fought 10 more times and won all 10, but the Bangkok press noticed something had changed. She still wore the orchid, the signature combination still appeared, but she'd started pulling her elbows back from full extension, started boxing more, breaking less. The people who'd watched her for years could see it, even if they couldn't say what had caused it. She retired in 1976, undefeated, and told her students for years afterward that the hardest opponent to read is the one who isn't fighting you the way you're fighting them. In an interview over a decade later, a magazine asked if any fight stood out from the rest. She thought about it for a long time. She said there had been a foreigner once. She'd thought he was laughing at her. She'd called him into the ring to teach him not to. For 90 seconds, nothing she threw landed. In 14 years, she'd never met a body she couldn't touch. When the punch finally came, she didn't see it arrive. She only felt herself lift off the canvas. He'd stood over her. She'd closed her eyes, waiting for the rest. He stepped back instead. She said she understood it now, or some of it. He'd told her he was a martial artist. That was all he'd wanted her to know, so that was all she knew. By the time that interview was published, Bruce Lee had been dead for over a decade, and his face was on the wall of half the gyms in Bangkok. He never spoke publicly about that night. He never had to. He had taught a champion something in 90 seconds that took her the rest of her career to fully understand, and he had done it without ever telling her his name. Years afterward, the cut man who had worked her corner that night was asked about it by a younger trainer who'd heard the story secondhand and wanted to know if it was true. The old man didn't answer right away. He said he had stood at those ropes for over 20 years and had seen Dow do things to grown men that he still didn't like to think about. He said that what he remembered most wasn't the punch or even the bow, it was the 90 seconds before it. He said he had watched a lot of fighters survive Dow. Surviving was loud. It looked like effort, like desperation, like someone holding on. What he saw that night didn't look like survival at all. It looked like a man taking a walk while someone tried to hit him, and somehow that was more unsettling to watch than anything else that had happened in that ring in 20 years. He said the gym still talked about it sometimes, late after the younger fighters had gone home.
Not as a story about a loss. Dow's record never changed, technically, because it had never been a sanctioned fight. It existed in the gym the way certain stories exist in families, half history, half something closer to scripture, repeated carefully because the people repeating it understood that something in it mattered beyond the facts. Dow herself rarely brought it up, but the cut man said that for years afterward, before every fight, when she pinned the orchid above her ear, there was a half-second pause beforehand that hadn't been there before that September night, as if she were remembering briefly that the flower could fall, and that when it did, the most dangerous thing a person could do was hand it back to you without a word. If this story reminded you that the most complete answer to being underestimated is simply to show what you are, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Subscribe for more stories about the man behind the legend. Because Bruce Lee never argued with anyone who doubted him. He just stepped into the ring and let them find out for themselves.